Welcome to Radical Remembering with psychologists
Dr. Norissa
and Dr. Bukky.
This is a weekly conversation where we explore the ways we've internalized oppression and consider what it really means to be liberated.
Each episode will leave you with intimate knowledge of the liberation process, sprinkle a little healing magic, and leave you with wisdom for your journey. So what's good, y'all? Norissa. All right, this is our first podcast. So I think we should probably start with telling people how we even met. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
What's your memory of it?
My memory of it, right? So we were supposed to meet as far as I'm concerned, because I had, at the time I was the director of a master's program at NYU, and my students kept insisting that I come to this. They had a power and partnership group insisting that I come to this particular meeting. And I was like, okay, it's late, it's 7:00 on a Friday. And I had a 40-hour work week. And I went, and the speaker was somebody who was interning for you. And I don't know, everything they were saying about you was intriguing to me. And I remember Googling you and seeing your face from then. And then a little bit after that, being at one of Ken Hardy's conference and seeing your name as a speaker. Fast forward a few months, recently moved to Maplewood, New Jersey, and I'm at this festival I had never been to before. And I'm like, is that the woman whose picture I've been seeing? Like, this is crazy. But also add to that, our shared friends, Melissa Robinson, Dr. Mel Robinson, had been telling me, oh, you have to meet Bukky. You have to meet my friend Bukky. So, and this is 4 different avenues pointing to you or to our union. So by the time we finally met in September, so that's not even a full year at the time of this recording, either you had just come in or you had just come in and you had your plate in your hand, and we were standing up talking for like a good 45 minutes. And we knew immediately, like, this is it.
Yeah. No, because I feel like, it's like spirit sisters, and, by the way, for the audience, I identify as gender nonconforming. So a lot of times if I use identify as sister, like brother, sister. So the masculine core of me, I'm always wanting to be held. But there's something actually quite comfortable actually with you in the sense of like sisterhood. I put an asterisk right behind it. But literally, I think I wish y'all had been there, because there's something about you, Norissa. I think when people meet you, there is a gentleness. There is like lots of space you give. There is a brilliance. There's a groundedness in terms of the way you move in the world. And it's easy to be attracted to that. And I feel like certainly Mel had been talking, you're Mel's new friend that Mel just kept to talk about. And she told me about some other things that y'all had been involved with that I already knew were people. And the thing about that connection is that I trust Mel. And so I trust whoever she says are her people are immediately my people, But one of the things just I remember is the fact that I feel like I came into that party with crazy energy, but I was starving. But I literally was talking to you, and I was just oh my God, Norissa is so fucking brilliant. Oh, sorry, we're allowed to curse. Am I allowed to? Okay. I was I was engaged, and I feel talking to you is when you're someone who when people talk with you, they leave that conversation, whether or not they intended, they leave that conversation a little bit smarter. They understand something a little bit more precisely. So I feel blessed about our union. And your invitation to be I think we could do some fun work around this together. So thank you for everything and people don't know, y'all don't know is Norissa's been the brain behind a lot of what we're going to be doing, and y'all going to see us do is, this vision, which, she's had this vision, feel it made sense to me in my spirit as well. But I just want to be explicit and to give you credit for the fact that if y'all are listening to us and watching us right now, it is because of a lot of the heavy lift that Norissa has done. So I just want to be explicit about my gratitude to you for all of that.
Thank you. You trying to make me cry? Thank you. Talk about feeling seen. I feel wholly seen. I appreciate that. And just so that you know, whenever I talk to you to somebody, I always feel like you already have met everybody in my circle, and you haven't yet. But I always say too, I was to know Bukky is to love her. You know what I mean? Because I feel the same about you and your person and your charisma and, your brilliance also, every single time that we have a conversation, she sees so clearly. And it makes me know how good at your work you must be. Right. So can you share a little bit about the work that you do, Dr. Kolawale?
Really, really, are you gonna go there? Like, it's, I'll put it this way, y'all. I am trained as a clinical psychologist, and I've been talking very actively that I am actively in the process of reclaiming my identity as a healer. I think that when we go to school, to go to grad school, there's a difference between learning to treat people versus learning to heal, right? And if I'm like just being like to the heart of it, is like, given white supremacy culture and how complicit our education systems and psychology has been in bed with like white supremacy ideology, in many ways, I feel like the training I received made me a psychologist, right? And I'm like, that's not what I signed up to be, right? I think that part of, I think my gift, right, is really around being able to see people, being able to like support people in really like coming into their own truth, telling their own truth, like feeling their own wisdom and like courage to do that. And, I think so. This long-winded way to just say, I think that the work I do, and I can get into like the details of I do organizational work, as well as like I also provide like one-on-one, as well as like therapy for like partners. But I think the piece that I'm just saying is like, no matter what work I'm doing, part of what I'm always doing is healing, right? And to be clear, and I think it's a bidirectional experience, that like my work is healing for me, right? As I'm also feeling like permission to like really be leaning into this, like, that word healing is such a complicated word. And I think this is a part of our conversation around even our sense of audacity to, like, when I say the word, I have no problem describing myself as a practitioner, right? But to say, yo, I'm a healer, there's a responsibility that comes with that word, So I feel like the best way to say is like, I'm doing healing work. And it's really being in service of like helping my people be able to like reclaim their voices. And for our white brothers and siblings, white brothers, sisters, and like non-binary siblings, is really similarly to be helping them certainly be doing their own work too, so that we can really be involved in much more authentic relationship that doesn't require the kinds of patterns of relationship and relating that we've been engaged in. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it was like a long-winded way of trying to introduce myself, because I don't got a pitch. I don't do pitches, and I should be doing pitches maybe.
I love it. I love it because I also because what we will share with you all is that we're focused on liberation journeys, and I can hear the journey also in your identification of what it is you do and where you are, right? Because you move from the box of practitioner psychologist to something that is more broad and not situated only in your educational training and professional background and different things like that. So I think that that's liberating and decolonizing and exemplary of what it is we're here and talking about to do. And so I probably wouldn't have even thought to, and that speaks to the liberating work that we all have to do, right? So I probably wouldn't even thought to identify myself in a context like this, where there's a larger audience, that I didn't know as a healer, but I most certainly am a healer and have been in healing professions for over 20 years, right? And when I think healing, I think of it a little bit reverse from you. It feels like less pressure to me to be a healer, because I don't think that I have the power to heal anyone. I think that I create a healing context, and the individual or the group, whomever I'm working with, can choose to step in and engage in that context, realize their own power. We share power together in that dynamic, and we realize the healing together, right? And so for me, it takes a little bit less. Because I think of it in such a dynamic, two-part, multi-part kind of way. It takes a less pressure off of me too. But I am also, my first degree is in social work, and I definitely worked a lot in the community mental health centers. And then the doctoral degree is in psychology, which trained me more in the research realm, because it's applied developmental psychology, where I studied lifespan development and intervention throughout the lifespan. And so in many ways, I'm an interventionist, scientist. I never intended to steer away from mental health. And so I can never steer away from it. So I consider myself also a practitioner, even though I'm not actively seeing clients in that way right now, but I also do energy healing and different things like that too. And my what I do full time now is I partner with organizations as the CEO of Liberation RPI to help them move along and in this liberation journey. So to create context where marginalized people in general, but as a Black woman, I'm super passionate about the Black experience, but very much through an intersectional lens, because there is no single issue struggle, as Angela Davis says. And so creating context where people are free to be themselves and free from white supremacy, because even white folks need to be free from white supremacy because it's not working for any of us. It's a very, very, very small subset of the population for whom it works for. And so my passion, and as one of my students said, she's one of my biggest cheerleaders. She said, "You're doing the Lord's work." So that's my ministry right there.
That's amazing. And no, I feel like exactly what you just did. Yeah. See, yeah, remember when I said earlier, like already, how much have you already learned? Right. But I really, really appreciated how you broke down this piece around the ease with which you feel like you can use the word healer, given that your sense of what you see as what you're responsible for is creating the container. Right. And it's just a much more, what you said is you said it in a much more eloquent way. And I still think even sense of somehow, because I think healing it's organic, it is influenced by things that we don't always have control over. It is also influenced by our attention and our intention. Because of all of those things, I think even the sense of like somehow in my head, right, it is easier for me to have this model in my mind through which I do work. And it is an application of intervention. You see what I'm saying? It just feels, I feel like I have a lot more control, right? Whereas even the idea of like my role is to create the container. I'm just like, you see what I'm saying? So like my point is, I feel like the piece I'm just trying to like emphasize is that like, I think that thing you said earlier is like related to where you are in your journey is part of what makes it easier for you to be able to hold that with a little bit more comfort. And even let's use the word confidence, right? Then, for example, someone like myself, where I'm still like, I'm trying to like be like, does it really fit? Can I really own that? Is that, you know what I'm saying? So I just appreciate the way you talked about that and like you think about that and just the recognition around sharing power as we think about like healing.
So let's talk about what are we here to talk about? What is this podcast about? What can the people expect?
Yeah. So but let's start because when we asked this question, we said like, we named this radical remembering, right? So I want to like, maybe we play with this idea, like what is radical remembering to you? Mm-hmm. And break out, like maybe what we do is like break those words out together and then put them together.
Okay. So when I think of radical, I think of an about face, right? So we are in a stream going in one direction. And that stream is white supremacy, male supremacy, all those kinds of things. And when I think of radical, we're doing an about face in an environment that does not have the support for us. So it's really radical. It's really going against the current and going against the stream. And the remembering part speaks to me about multiple things, right? So first, it speaks to me about the fact that I do believe that in our DNA is encoded ancestral memory, spirit consciousness, and all these sorts of things. Like, so we know, right? So we know so much, but we've forgotten in ourselves, like what it is that we do know, what it is that we're here to do, how we can better relate with one another. And so moving away from the toxins and poisons of domination, and that domination being white supremacy and, all the other forms of supremacy manifest in society, moving away from those things so we can come back to our true essence, right? And so our true essence is a liberated, space, a liberated being that is in right relationship with our own power, right? And so when I say remembering, it's for me, remembering our power, remembering our history, our stories, who we are. But I also think of it through a trauma lens, right? And so from a trauma lens, when any individual or group has experienced trauma, we dissociate as a means of coping, right? And so when we dissociate, it becomes a separate part that is not digested into the whole, right? And so when we separate the head from the body, right? So I can cope and I can think about these things and I can move through and push through all these stressors. whether these be our personal family, intimate family stressors or societal stressors or our ancestral history, the transatlantic slave trade and all those things. And we push forward, we're separating our head from our body. And so we're not embodied and we're not present in our body. And it has been, necessary for our own healing. But so when I think of remembering, I'm thinking of association, bringing back those parts of our stories, digesting it so that we have healing for ourselves, for the generations that come after us, as well as so it can trickle up the line and there's some intergenerational healing in our bloodline. So when I think of remembering, I'm thinking of bringing back the parts of ourselves that we've lost at the cost because of trauma.
Yeah. I think that's such a beautiful way, an eloquent way of describing it. And it's such a, like, this is what I was talking about. Like when Dr. Norissa speaks, you better get those notes out, right? Start writing things down, because no, I just think you've broken it down on the different levels that need to be explicit. I think the only piece I would add for me is that one of the things that white supremacy culture deludes us about is this idea of objectivity. Mm. And that the only way to know is through the like the scientific mind, and it's really just the mind. And there's been a devaluation of the body and around the ancestral wisdom we know, right? Around emotional experiences we have and emotional truth, right? And so for me, I think remembering is around like an interrogation of this idea of objectivity and really an abandonment, to be clear, to recognize that objectivity ain't it's not real. We can't have it, right? The mere fact that we're human beings already, right, removes us from our ability to be objective. So let's stop lying about that, So I think for me, I think it is a process of constantly reminding myself to no longer lie about that, and a permission to start to claim all the parts of myself that I have separated from, right? Because of my attempts to succeed in a world that's dominated by white supremacy ideology. So I think that's the only piece I would add is just to get this piece of objectivity. Let's get to the heart of it. For me, that's the piece that really, I was telling you the other day, I went to this retreat where a lot of the time was just spent in somatic practices, right? Being able to be in touch with our body and paying attention to sensation. And literally, and this is the piece you were saying, what happens when we've experienced trauma, and just this constant way our society has been requiring us and cutting us off from our body and the wisdom of our body, right? And and our body's keeping a whole lot, storing a whole lot, So I think that it's this piece around becoming reacquainted with our body and becoming more embodied with what we know, So I think that's the piece I would add to what you've already brilliantly shared about what radical remembering is.
I'm clapping on the inside because first of all, this conversation is so exciting to me. But so one of my favorite quotes that brings to mind, Audre Lorde says in Sister Outsider. Actually, no, it's the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. She says, the white father says, I think, therefore I am, right? And that speaks of that separation and how Eurocentric culture has sought to normalize that as a way of being in our institutions. But she said, the Black mother says, I feel, therefore I can be free, right? And it's just if you just think about, meditate on that, just that one verse right there, feeling, right? And being in your divine feminine, and I'm not speaking about that in a gendered way, because I think we all have divine masculine and divine feminine characteristics. The society has geared us towards the divine masculine, to the underdevelopment of the divine feminine. And really what she's talking about there is just living in that place of feeling and allowing ourselves to integrate all these things like you're saying. And it has so many benefits, whether that's social, psychological, emotional, and all those kinds of things. So I appreciate what you had to say as well.
Norissa, can you say that quote again? I feel, say that quote again. So
the white father says, I think, therefore I am. The Black mother says, I feel, therefore I can be free.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. All right. So, okay. So now, I mean, I think part of the question is like, how did you get here, Nerissa? Can you tell the audience about what brought you to this work?
This has been a journey, right? I'm like, what's the short version? Is there a short version? So, okay, so my family is from Trinidad, right? And so when your family is an immigrant and they come from a context which is majority, well, people of color. Right now it's more Indian than it is black, but it's people of color 98%, right? When race, black and white, is not an issue, you come here and they don't prepare you for it because that was not their reality, right? And so, and my family also, they received a lot of, when they came to the country, like, because they had a lot of negative things said about that, go back home on your banana boat and different things like that. They couldn't necessarily assimilate to the African American culture because they felt outside of it and different things like that. So there was, but yet I grew up in an African American context, right? So I didn't have preparation for the racialized world that I was in. Fortunately enough, and I say that and I give that context to say it's not their fault, right? Who, like, this shit is not normal. We shouldn't have to socialize our children about race. I was fortunate enough when I was 14 to get a job at a youth organization in the community, United North Amityville Youth Organization. And it was led by Valerie I got to give praises, right? And so what they did was, as part of our orientation, I thought the orientation was going to be about, okay, this is how you take care of kids and this is what you do. The orientation was like, let me talk to you about who you are as a Black woman, as a Black, young girl. And we're not starting after the Mayflower, we're starting before the Mayflower, right? And so the beautiful thing is that the rooms, the groups that we were in, like the camp rooms, were all named after, every year was named after different things. So one year it was named after the Kwanzaa principles. One year it was named after ethnic groups on throughout the continent. We learned everything, right? The original name of Africa, Akabulan, and the fact that it's not a country, it's not a country, it's a continent, and all these kinds of things. So that was always important to me. And then I've always been spiritual. I have a different spirituality now than then, but I was Christian, hardcore, like didn't listen to like secular music, all these kinds of things. And so, but I did used to pray a lot. And so one time in prayer, I felt like Spirit was telling me that I would be studying abroad in Africa, on the continent. And I was like, bet, I would love to, right? And so by the end of my studies, I saw this opportunity to study abroad and in Ghana, and I could have gone to South Africa. I chose Ghana because there was more Black people in the pamphlet. So I did that. And again, I was so heavy in my Christianity at that time that this was the first time that I had been in a context where I wasn't going to church for the half a year that I was there. And then even when I did go to church, so one of the things that was pivotal for me, and I'm going to try to make this short, but one of the things that was pivotal for me is that this girl, this young woman, I should say, she was sitting on the bench and I was standing there waiting for someone else. And she was like, "You're invited." And I was like, huh? Like, and she was like, "You're invited." She had nuts in her hand. And so we started a conversation. I was like, "Oh, thank you." I took some nuts or whatever. And I asked her what her name was. And she said, "Linda." It's like, Linda? I did not expect to come to Ghana and meet somebody named some damn Linda talking about that's her Christian name. I was like, that shit is not even in the Bible. How is that your Christian name? And so that was one of the beginning ways, in those months that I was there, learning about Kwame Nkrumah and just learning about how Christianity was used to colonize and different things like that. And how, until Kwame Nkrumah, like you, because of colonialism, imperialism, you weren't allowed to use your African name, wear your traditional wear, how all these things were stolen from their spirituality and all these sorts of things. And I began to think about it in new and different ways. So I came back and I was going to church, but it was hollow for me now because now I was questioning things like, this is a form of social control, it feels like, and this, you know what I mean? And so it would still be another 2 or 3 years that I was going in church. And because that had been for 10 years so ingrained in my identity, I didn't know who I would be outside of church. So I didn't necessarily leave. But then something happened and I ended up leaving with my then husband, who was Ghanaian, and began to see things in new and different ways. And so really for then it was, like you were just out there not really I didn't have much of a direction. And so I would say for like a good 20-year period, I was finding my direction. And without intention, I was decolonizing and purging from the doctrine that I had received. And so now it has been so much more intentional because even when I went back for my doctorate, I was focusing on, race as a context and race within institutions and how providers could be more culturally competent and all these kinds of things. And so it having been, this is the last piece of the story, having always felt like an outsider because I've never really kind of fit in. I've always had a hybrid identity. I'm Trinidadian American. I am this, that, like I've always been here and there. That's like my life story. Being very aware of what it is to feel other within a context led me to really think about, race, ethnicity, and all these things. And, that intellectual pursuit has been my salvation in many ways.
Wow, thank you. So many questions. And part of what's so nice, Norissa, is like your ability to tell that like your journey has not been like a straight line, right? And the way that you could quickly punch that up to like just help people be able to see and understand how you've gotten here. And I'm gonna have a longer struggle because I'm like, I don't even know because as you were even talking, part of what I was really appreciating, right? And I think I think we were talking about this earlier, is true about like the ways in which you have been like actively decolonized, right? And part of as you were talking, I was thinking about my own self, and it's interesting because I think the piece, and I think this is why it is interesting that we like decided to do this together, because you are always, I think your work and the things that you're doing is constantly talking about decolonizing, right? And the piece of like where I enter this conversation is around being deGEMMified, right? I'm gonna explain that concept to y'all in a later. Just hold at it, right? But it's like as you were telling your story, I was noticing that my story has really been around like my journey around becoming deGEMMified, right? Being my deGEMMification process. Yeah, so I was just saying like how my story is my story is around like when I think about my story, like my point is like literally in our telling of our stories, it's the context. You're telling a story of decolonization of your own self, and the story I'll be telling is a story of my own journey into deGEMMification. And if you're in the audience and you're like, wait, what is is that even a word? Watch our next episode, Mike. We're gonna break it down, explain it, and all that. But I think the gist of like how I would say is like, I'm Nigerian, born in Nigeria, born and raised in Nigeria, moved to this country when I was about 12 years old. And as Nigerian, Yoruba specifically, similar to you, Norissa, like, I did not grow up, I talk about not growing up with the burden of racism, right? Is anti-Blackness real in Nigeria? Very much so. Even though my people will deny it all day long, ask them about their bleaching creams, all right? But the gist here is that, I think that if I'm even honest about it, I think that I started thinking much more consciously around race when, like, I've been having lots of experiences, right? And not having language for the racialized experience I was having. And I think when I moved to this country, I was 12 years old. And if you look at my poetry, when I was younger, I would write poetry. I remember writing one poem within the first, maybe first year or 2 years that I've been in this country, where I talk about the experience as a teenager walking into 7-Eleven and being followed. And my white friends not being followed, and that was really confusing to me. Yeah, so, fast forward to, I was just not clear around, it was not until that experience that I personally realized that there is in this country, right, in America, consequences for my Blackness. I had never experienced that, being somebody who grew up in Nigeria, moved to this country, started high school. And again, kind of that same container you were talking about is saying, as Nigerians and Africans, because we live in society where most of us are pretty homogeneous, right, in terms of our like different hues, right, but we're all Black people, right? So not just understanding what it means to be racialized, right? And so it was a quick lesson, or was my beginning of my initiation. Anyway, fast forward to like, going to school, all of that. And I remember actually even like, my ex-girlfriend, we used to have this stupid fight. It used to feel like such a stupid fight to me, right? Where she was trying to bring attention to the fact that, like, as an African, there are ways in which in this country, sometimes what even happens is that this thing that happens that white people do that put Africans in battle with African Americans, right? So she was trying to point out to me like how, I can't remember what the conversation we were having, but I'll never forget it now, especially with this like concept of deGEMMification and deGEMMification that I'm like in now, of like, isn't it interesting to me that like I was one of the people who would always, anytime people wanted to give awards out to a Black person, it was always me or someone that like looked and sounded like. And part of what she was really talking about, and I didn't understand that then, was around how whitewashed I was. And just the way in which like my consciousness as somebody who didn't grow up in this country was very, very similar to the consciousness of white people, right? Like in the emergent, so I think part of, so I went to school, did all that stuff, and was very, very, like, there was a point when I was talking with another clinician, and this, by the way, she's Dr. Marjorie Nightingale. She is a badass clinician. So if you find her, if you ever see her doing a talk, go. She's brilliant. Anyway, so she was doing, so I was learning this model called emotionally focused therapist. Emotionally focused therapy, and that's the model I used to do my couples work. And she was in process of getting her doctoral degree at that point. And she was doing some research where she was essentially studying the application of this model with like African American, like Black American people. And so she was like in conversation with me, and she was like, Bukky, so I'm doing this research. And so she has like a qualitative, like, and she's doing interviews with her participants. And she's like asking about their experiences of, I think he was talking about race in therapy. And so she was like, Bukky, can you believe that even like folks, even Black therapists ain't talking about race with their clients, with their Black clients, with their clients of color? Can you believe it? And I was like, no, I cannot believe it. And inside of me, I was like, oh shit, I'm one of those therapists who's absolutely, unless my client was bringing it up, I actually wasn't raising it. And I was like, it was one of those first moments of like being really aware of like ways in which I had been, like I said, whitewashed and trained really, really well to not talk about like race in professional, right? I'm having these conversations with my friends. I'm having these conversations like around race with my people, right? In non-professional settings. But there's this different way that I realized I was engaging and showing up around race and racism in professional settings that was really curious to me. So, so it was one of those pieces where I was like a moment of like internal like awareness. I don't even think I would even call it reckoning yet. And I noticed a discomfort. Let's not call it discomfort. I noticed shame. I noticed shame about it, especially because of my clarity that people were choosing and opting into seeing me because of my Blackness. So part of it is this piece of like becoming aware that like, wait, my clients are finding me because they want a therapist that looks like them. And then here I am, not even bringing up race unless they had unless they brought it up. So there was just this piece around just feeling like mad shame about it, feeling like mad disappointed about it. And then also recognizing that like not only had I not been taught, but like actively discouraged, like our programming, the way our programs as like when you're being trained as a psychologist, the only conversations where we were like anyone was invited to really talk about race explicitly was really when they would be training white clinicians to do that piece around like, so what is it like to work with a white therapist, right? To talk to when you're working with a client of color, right? And so that was my only even like awareness or like introduction of like how you can bring that into the clinical setting, right? So it was just one of those pieces where like I was just like all these things were sort of like making sense, like just like I was like click, 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 click internally for me. Then I went to this conference, y'all. Write down the name of this conference. By the way, one of the people you will hear me refer to in the like season of this is one of my mentors, Dr. Kenneth Hardy, one of the most brilliant human beings I've ever like met. Like if I could have a day to just sit inside this man's brain, I would. And I give up the day, I would do it. Anyway, I went to a conference that Ken did called the Soul Work Conference. And it's a conference that's focused on healing. And it is actively, whenever the theme of this conference is, it's always talking about like really doing our work as people. It's designed for folks of color, right? White people are certainly invited as well. And white people who are also going to be doing their work while they're there, trust me. But the piece that like, I can't remember what it was about that experience, but it was the first time that I got clear around this thing I was talking about earlier around objectivity and how this idea, it was the first time that I realized that all of these models that, as clinicians, we're trained to be objective, right? That's almost like the cardinal rule is around this piece about not imposing any of our agenda. So part of the reason why we are trained out of like not bringing up, for example, right, as clinicians of color who move around in a quite racist world and know a experience of racism, right, we are not bringing up and getting curious with our clients independently about like their experience of race and racism, right? Because if the client didn't bring it up, then that's my agenda, right? So when I've been trained to not do that, right? But part of the piece that got clear to me is that these models that I had been like touting and like holding up and like using as my like clean, objective lens through which I'm working with people, it was like the first time where I was like, wait, man, and usually white people, white men, some of EFT white women design this model and whose values are actually built into these models? Theirs. So this idea of objectivity, I'm sitting here thinking I'm being objective. I ain't being objective. I'm just imposing somebody else. So it was one of those moments where I got clear and I was like, oh, so it's one of those that like, just, I would sort of describe as like part of what my awakening and like has really helped me see the ways in which that I was colluding and I was engaged in collusion with white supremacy by actively avoiding and engaging as a professional with race and racism, right? Given the ways in which like the power I was suddenly like acquiring as a clinician, as like I'm doing talks, I'm doing whatever, and I'm like, right? I was just, Dr. Ken Hardy talks about this piece around like being trained to be a good, just be a good white therapist, right? But we have like different, we're people of color walking around, but really we're just like any other like white therapist, right? So it was one of those moments where I really saw myself and I was like, yeah, nah, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be, I'm not here for that. And so that's really part of like it's my very long-winded story to help you all understand like how I've gotten here. And like, I am in like battle, like literally daily, right? Like when I do talks and I go to these conversations, and this is what I'm hired to do now, right? Is to support organizations certainly in building their capacity to have conversations about race, racism, and inequity. And how long it took me to be able to use the word white supremacy with white people present in professional spaces, right? And I know y'all know about that, right? So anyway, that's just my story. I am so excited about like just what we have planned for you all and the conversation we're going to be getting into, because my hope is that you will be using myself and Norissa as just like as like the way Norissa talks about it, like a point on the spectrum, right? Of like what liberation looks like. And we're all in our different places in the journey. And yeah, that's what I got, Norissa.
Yeah, loving it. And so, yeah, so in all, this conversation is a good sample for all of you to know about what the rest of our podcast will be about. It is going to be about liberation journeys. What has this process been like? Because all of you are on, I'm assuming, listening to this somewhere in your liberation journey. And to be able to have this supportive community of people who are decolonizing, liberating, coming back home to themselves and all these kinds of things, we hope to offer something useful for your journey. Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
If you've loved what we've had to say, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.
I'm Dr. Norissa, and you can find me on IG at Dr. Norissa Williams.
And I'm Dr. Bukky. You can find me on IG at the official Dr. Bukky.
You can also stay abreast of our latest offerings at our website, radicalremembering.com.